credit, I believe, on this House and Parliament as a whole.
My Lords, it's always a huge pleasure to follow the noble Lord Forsyth, even when I deeply disagree with him. And I have to, first of all, congratulate the noble lady, Lady Burt, on this bill. But unfortunately, rather like Lord Forsyth, I feel there are so many flaws in it that I have to say that I have great concern about the way it is worded and indeed how it would actually work in practice. I recognise very much that this is a huge amount of work. I've, in time, I think, produced 2 or 3 of my own bills, private members' bills in this House over many years, and I just remember how much detail one has to go in, how many discussions one makes. But I feel really there's too much here really to let this slide without being at least pretty critical of it. You know, I was first, I suppose, aware of the fact of the danger of being ever involved publicly with any aspect of transgender for being called homophobic. And I make this point to the House now that I feel quite concerned about that because I actually had very serious threats when I discussed gender many years ago in the press. And I would just want to point out that I think I was the first person, certainly in Britain, probably in Europe, to treat ladies who were of the same sex with in vitro fertilization. That is to say, they were lesbian couples. And the thing was, we couldn't tell anybody that they were lesbian couples because if we did so, we knew that the phone tapping was already available and those people would be identified. And it was some years before we actually explained what we were doing. And because there was so much concern about sexuality, which is always in the press, as there is now with this. So one has to be very careful how one words what we say in this House for reasons of being thought to be prejudiced. There's no prejudice in my mind about this. But I have to say that one of the interesting things is that the issue of sexuality is extremely curious. Some time in the 1980s, I don't remember exactly when, a couple of colleagues of mine and I started to look at the metabolism of human embryos in culture when they're completely invisible at day 2. And what we found was completely extraordinary. We found that male embryos were actually more active in terms of their metabolism of sugars, of the substrate, than were female embryos. And we were really puzzled about this, but we were so concerned that this was probably ridiculous and shoppy, and really we felt we couldn't publish the data. And we didn't. We thought it would be ridiculed. Now, actually, there are new data coming through with more sophisticated work, which shows that actually the thing that we refused to publish initially was probably correct, and we probably would have had a world first. But again, that sensitivity about sex was even there in that publication. And I think that's something worth thinking about. So I have to say that when you start to look at the data on transgender, the problem we have very much, and I can refer to any number of papers, but one by Ristarian Stemser is a pretty good one, which has got a very big review of something like 1,000 different, I think, cases that have been published. We see that really, when it comes to transgender, there is far more that is not known than actually is known, and the definitions are really extraordinarily difficult. The incidence itself is a problem, because it's assessed in that paper, I think, that the incidence is likely to be about 1 or 2 or maybe 5. Joanne Winston. I'm sorry, my medical, I'm in pain, my medical practitioner is calling me. I do apologise, that should have been off. I have a problem with my hip and I can't walk, and I'm sort of struggled to get into the House this morning, but I felt this was an important debate to speak in, so forgive me for that. When I look at this, I can see, for example, there's so many doubts about this. For example, the incidence isn't very clear. In fact, the incidence seems to change from childhood to adulthood. At the highest level, perhaps 25% of people who really want to be transgender go on to be transgender and actually take action, but it's rather far less than that that actually do so. Secondly, it's very, very clear from my own practice in reproductive medicine that actually a number of people who've had transgender procedures when they are now post the postmenopausal stage of life have deep regrets, so much so that they become occasionally deeply depressed. It doesn't happen often, and of course most of the time we can see very clearly that there are many couples who are completely happy with their new gender assignment. But that's not invariable, and we don't understand that. But the basic problem, my lords, is this, that here we are at risk of legislating for a piece of biology that we really don't understand. We don't understand the underlying mechanisms. We don't even have the figures of knowing how common this really is. We don't even know the follow-up. None of the papers that really have looked at the incidence have followed up patients for long enough to fairly get a clear-eye view of what's really needed. And I think, therefore, any kind of legislation putting this into law is wrong. What we might want to do is to call for research. We could argue that actually, rather than have a regulatory authority for human fertilization and embryology, which I think now is completely unnecessary because there are ways of doing this, we could certainly consider a statutory authority for this sort of treatment because there is so much more to understand, to learn, and to follow up these patients. In my view, that would be something that would be really useful. But I have to say that I think it would be quite wrong for us to pass this bill, and I cannot see any serious amendments would really actually help it on its progress.
My Lords.